This documentary is for educational and memorial purposes. It contains details of real criminal events that some viewers may find distressing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Tonight, it's already Australia's worst serial killing, and it's not over yet.
Body number 10 has been found buried in the backyard of a house.
Police now fear the toll could rise to at least 12.
8 bodies, 6 barrels, a disused bank vault, and a smell that investigators say they will never forget. May 20th, 1999, Snowtown, South Australia. The vault door opens, and the something chemical, sharp, industrial, layered over something biological, something that hits the back of the throat before the brain has a word for it. Officers in protective gear stop moving. 6 blue plastic barrels, sitting in the dark. They pry the first lid. Inside, hydrochloric acid, pale yellow in the torchlight, and a human torso. Limbs severed at the joints, compressed downward to fit. The acid has been dissolving what is left of this person for weeks. Second barrel, another body. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. 8 bodies, 6 barrels. This vault is in a town called Snowtown. Population 500. Wheat fields in every direction. One main street. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. Only one of the 12 people who died here actually died here. The other 11 were killed across Adelaide's northern suburbs, in living rooms, in bathrooms, in cars parked in quiet suburban driveways, by a man their families trusted, by a man their neighbors waved to over the fence. 12 people dead, 7 years of murders, and a man who collected their welfare payments while their families waited for phone calls that would never come. His name is John Bunting, and for 7 years he has been operating in plain sight. This is the complete story of the Snowtown murders, Australia's worst serial killing case, and the most ordinary monster you will ever encounter. A warning before we continue. What follows contains graphic descriptions of prolonged torture, murder, dismemberment, and psychological manipulation. It depicts violence against disabled people, transgender individuals, and family members, including a teenager forced to participate in the killing of his own relatives. It contains details of financial exploitation of the dead and the deliberate deception of grieving families. Some of what you are about to hear has never been widely reported. None of it has been exaggerated. Welcome to Twisted Truths. Tonight, we venture into a nightmare so evil it defies comprehension. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. To understand how 12 people could be tortured and murdered over 7 years, and how a man responsible for all of it could continue living among his neighbors, drinking their beer, bouncing their children on his knee, you have to understand where this happened. Not just the geography, the feeling of it. Adelaide's northern suburbs in the 1990s exist in a particular kind of Australian poverty. Not the dramatic, visible poverty of inner-city despair, a quieter version. Rows of identical housing trust properties on streets with names like Waterloo Corner Road and Burdekin Avenue. Small yards, fibro walls, neighbors who know each other because there is not enough space not to. People who drift between addresses, crash on couches, move in with partners and relatives and friends for months at a time before moving on again. Salisbury North, Murray Bridge, Elizabeth. These are not places that appear in travel guides or newspaper lifestyle sections. They are places where people get through, where welfare payments come in on Tuesdays and the pub fills up on Fridays, and everyone knows someone who has disappeared, moved to Queensland, people say, or gone off the rails, or just drifted away the way people drift when there is nothing keeping them tethered. Disappearance in this world is not suspicious. It is normal. This is the first thing John Bunting understood before he understood anything else. That the people around him, transient, isolated, welfare-dependent, frequently estranged from mainstream society, were people whose absence would generate a missing persons report at most, a few phone calls, a case file that stayed open because nobody closed it. Not an investigation, not urgency, not the kind of sustained, institutional attention that might expose what he was building. He was right. For 7 years, he was right. The second thing Bunting understood was ideology, specifically the power of giving people a reason to look away. In communities marked by disadvantage and fear, the threat of child abuse is not abstract. It is real, immediate, and it produces a particular kind of rage in people who feel that authorities have failed them, who believe that the police don't care about their streets, that the courts let predators walk, that someone has to do something. Bunting was that someone. He told people he was protecting children. He said it loudly, frequently, with conviction. He had opinions about who in the neighborhood was dangerous. He had names. He had a system. Neighbors heard him and thought, he's passionate, he's protective, he cares about this community. They didn't look harder. There was no reason to look harder. He was one of them. Inside his spare room, on a wall covered in paper notes and colored yarn, Bunting kept what he called his rock spider wall. Rock spider, Australian slang for paedophile. The names connected by yarn were people he suspected, on no evidence whatsoever, of being paedophiles or homosexuals. He would call them, threaten them, terrorize them by phone. And then, when the time was right, he would select a name and act. No one in the neighborhood knew the wall existed. Why would they? He was the friendly man next door, the one who cared about kids. Australia in the 1990s had also not yet confronted the particular shape of this kind of killer. The country's defining serial murder case of that decade was Ivan Milat, the backpacker killer, a lone predator who targeted strangers on highways. The framework that existed for understanding serial murder in Australia was built around the stranger, the highway, the isolated victim. It had no architecture for a man who killed people he knew, in their homes, with their family members present, while their neighbors waved to him over the fence. The welfare system, designed to protect the most vulnerable, became infrastructure. Bunting and his associates claimed the social security payments of their victims after their deaths.
And pretty early on, pretty soon after those cameras were installed, police were able to obtain footage of a person making withdrawals from Barry Lane's bank account. Only it wasn't Barry Lane.
And impersonated them at ATMs, used their bank cards for months. The system registered no alerts. The bodies were in the barrels. The payments kept coming. This is the world that made the Snowtown murders possible. Not darkness and isolation, ordinariness, familiarity. A neighborhood that trusted the wrong man because he had learned precisely what trust looks like from the outside. Frederick Brooks received the letter on a Tuesday. Australian Air Force cadets, accepted. He was 18 years old, and he held that piece of paper and felt what every 18-year-old feels when something they wanted finally arrives. The future taking a shape they can name, a direction, a uniform, a life that was going somewhere beyond the northern suburbs of Adelaide, where he had grown up with almost nothing. His mother was Jodie Elliott. His aunt was Elizabeth Harvey. Through those two women, Frederick existed at the outermost edge of John Bunting's social circle. Not inside it, not aware of it, just a young man whose family had the profound misfortune of being close to the wrong people at the wrong time. He had no reason to be afraid. That is the detail that matters most. He was not naive. He was not reckless. He was an 18-year-old boy who had just been accepted into the Air Force cadets, who probably told his friends, who probably felt, for the first time in a while, like things were going to be all right. In September 1998, someone he knew invited him to a party. He said yes, the way any 18-year-old says yes, without thinking, without hesitation. The way you say yes when you are young and the evening is free and there is nothing to be afraid of. That was the last ordinary moment of Frederick Brooks's life. He was not the only one who died this way. Clinton Trezise was 20 years old when John Bunting invited him over for a social visit and bludgeoned him to death with a shovel in the living room. David Johnson was 24 when his own stepbrother told him there was a cheap computer for sale in Snowtown. Gary O'Dwyer was 29, mentally and physically disabled, when someone he trusted invited him out for drinks. Vanessa Lane was 42 when she was handed a phone and told to call her mother and say she was moving to Queensland. She said it in her own voice. Her mother believed her. Vanessa was already being held. The lures were always ordinary: a visit, a party, a drink, a bargain. The vocabulary of everyday life turned into a weapon by a man who had spent years learning exactly how much people trust the familiar. Michelle Gardner was 19. She'd been playing with children in her front yard the afternoon before she was killed. Troy Yude was 21, killed by people who shared his blood in a bathroom in the middle of the night, while the person who was supposed to protect him stood in the doorway holding handcuffs. Gavin Porter was 29 and had moved from Victoria to Adelaide after his mother died, building a fragile new life from nothing, making it work, until the night Bunting decided he was a waste. These were not faceless victims. They were people managing difficult lives in difficult circumstances, still trying, still present, still making plans. The word vulnerable appears in every account of this case, and it is accurate, but it should never be mistaken for passive. These were people who were still fighting to be alive in all the ways that matter, until the moment John Bunting decided they were not. Frederick Brooks choked to death on his own gag in a bathtub. The Air Force cadet's letter was probably still on the kitchen table at home. Nobody had thought to move it yet. John Justin Bunting was born September 4th, 1966, in Inala, Queensland. The first remarkable fact about him is one he had no control over. He was born without a sense of smell, a biological anomaly, a detail that registers as meaningless until you learn what he spent the last years of his life storing in acid-filled barrels, and then it becomes something else entirely. People who knew him as a young man described someone charming, social, the kind of person who made friends easily, who could work a room, who seemed genuinely to care about the people around him. These are not revisionist assessments from people trying to make sense of what he became. They are consistent. Bunting was likable. He knew how to be liked. At 8 years old, he was beaten and sexually assaulted by a friend's older brother. What that did to him is not something anyone can answer with certainty. What is documented is what came after. By his teens, he was killing neighborhood animals, cats and dogs, skinned with what his acquaintances described as disturbing precision. He developed obsessions, weapons, anatomy, photography. The tools of his future assembled in adolescence. In 1988, Bunting took a job at the SA Meat Corporation abattoir. He did not merely tolerate the work, he loved it. Colleagues remembered him bragging about the slaughter, the blood, the control, the finality of it, saying it was the part of the job he enjoyed most. At the time, this read as bravado, dark humor. The kind of thing you hear from someone who works with death and uses aggression to manage it. It was not bravado. In 1991, Bunting moved to Salisbury North and befriended his neighbors, Robert Joe Wagner and Mark Hayden. Wagner was 20 years old, impressionable, and would be groomed by Bunting into a willing participant in torture and murder. Hayden was older, quieter, and would eventually rent the building that stored the barrels, including the barrel containing his own wife. To the street, Bunting was a community man, the one who talked about protecting children, the one with opinions about the local predators, the ones the police weren't dealing with. He positioned himself as a vigilante before he had committed a single murder, building the ideological scaffolding first so that when the violence came, it already had a structure to hang on. His system was methodical. The rock spider wall, paper notes, colored yarn, names connected by threads of pure suspicion. He would call the people on the wall, threaten them, terrorize them by phone, letting them know they were being watched, that they would face consequences. It satisfied something in him, the control, the fear he could produce at a distance, and it also served as selection. He was choosing, watching how people responded, identifying targets. The forensic psychiatrist Kevin Howells, who studied the case, concluded that Bunting was a psychopathic killer who derived satisfaction not from the deaths themselves, but from total control. The cruelty was not incidental to the murders. It was the point. Victims were forced to call him God, Master, Chief Inspector, Lord Sir. They were made to recite banking information into recording devices, to beg, to degrade themselves entirely before the end came. Bunting needed them to know, in their final moments, that he held absolute power over them. And yet no one around him, not his neighbors, not the families of his future victims, not the friends who shared meals in his house, saw any of this. What they saw was the mask, the concerned community member, the man who loved his family, the vigilante protecting children. The most dangerous thing about John Bunting was not his violence, it was his performance. August 31st, 1992. A house on Waterloo Corner Road, Salisbury, South Australia. Clinton Trezise, 20 years old, walks through the front door of John Bunting's home. He has been invited over. He knows Bunting socially. He is not afraid. There is no reason to be afraid. He does not walk back out. Bunting bludgeons him to death with a shovel in the living room. The accusation, paedophile, has no evidence behind it. It never did. It is a decision Bunting made, the way he makes all his decisions, from nothing but his own certainty. Afterward, he gives Clinton a nickname, Happy Pants. He uses it in conversation for years, the way you reference an inside joke. That is the first murder. The method is established before the body is cold. The accusation, the lure, the kill, the nickname, the grave. Bunting will refine the process, but he will never fundamentally change it. He has found something that works. What follows over the next 7 years is not a series of isolated crimes. It is a system. Victims are selected from within Bunting's own social circle. Friends, neighbors, former partners, the disabled, the mentally ill, the transgender. Anyone Bunting decides is weak, or wrong, or inconvenient, or simply knows too much. The selection criteria shift constantly. The method does not. Victims are lured under ordinary pretexts, then restrained, handcuffed, thumb-cuffed, made completely helpless before Bunting begins. His signature is the pliers, toes crushed one by one, not to extract information, though information is extracted, but because Bunting needs his victims to understand, in their bodies, that he controls everything that happens to them now. That understanding is the point. The pain is the message. After the pliers come the recordings. Every victim is forced to speak into a device, bank PINs, account numbers, scripted messages saying they are moving away, cutting off contact, going to Queensland. Bunting uses these recordings afterward to deceive the victims' families, to make people wait, to buy months of silence while the body is in a barrel and the welfare payments keep coming. The killings escalate in brutality as the years pass and Bunting's confidence grows. By 1998, Frederick Brooks, 18 years old, just accepted into the Air Force Cadets, is tortured for hours in a bathtub. Lit cigarettes inserted into his ears and nostrils. A lit sparkler forced into his urethra. Bleach injected. Electrical current delivered to his body through a device wired specifically for this purpose. His toes crushed. He chokes to death on his own gag. Bunting does not rush. He never rushes. Forensic psychiatrist Kevin Howells, who studied the case, concluded that Bunting derived satisfaction not from death, but from total control, from the specific, extended moment when another human being has no power and he has all of it. The torture is not a means to an end. The torture is the end. Death, when it finally comes, arrives by strangulation. Slow, deliberate, consistent across victim after victim across 7 years. A signature so reliable it becomes, in retrospect, a forensic fingerprint. After death, dismemberment, blue plastic barrels, hydrochloric acid, bodies stored in backyards and sheds, moved between properties as needed, consolidated in January 1999 into the vault of an abandoned bank building in Snowtown that Mark Hayden has rented for this specific purpose. On May 9, 1999, 11 days before police open the vault, James Vlasakis tells his stepbrother David Johnson there is a cheap computer for sale in Snowtown. Johnson agrees to make the drive. He walks into the building. He is overpowered immediately. David Johnson is the only victim who actually dies in Snowtown. He is 24 years old, and when it is over, Bunting and Wagner do something that will not be reported publicly for years, something so far beyond the violence that has preceded it that even investigators hardened by everything else in this case will struggle to process it. They cook a piece of his flesh, and they eat it. The silence after that is not the silence of a crime concluded. It is the silence of a man who believes he is completely untouchable, who has been right about that for 7 years, who has 11 more days before he finds out he is wrong. The case should have broken open in 1994. On August 16th of that year, 2 years after Clinton Trezise was bludgeoned to death in Bunting's living room, Trezise's body was discovered in a shallow grave near Lower Light. South Australian police had a homicide. They had a burial site in a rural location. They had a victim whose last known social connections led directly to the suburban address of John Bunting. The case went cold. No connection was made, no follow-up. Trezise became an open file on a shelf, and Bunting went home to Salisbury North, and 4 months later, Ray Davis was dead, and the killing continued. 3 years after that, Thomas Trevelyan was found hanging from a tree in Humbug Scrub in the Adelaide Hills. Trevelyan suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and had a history of suicide attempts. He always wore army fatigues because he believed he was a soldier. On November 5, 1997, Bunting and Wagner drove him to Kersbrook, placed a noose around his neck, and arranged him against a box. He was found the following day. The coroner ruled it a suicide. It was murder, staged deliberately for a coroner who had every reason to accept the obvious interpretation. 2 institutional failures, 2 bodies, 8 more people still alive. Between 1992 and 1998, multiple missing persons reports were filed for individuals connected to Bunting's social circle in Adelaide's northern suburbs. The reports sat in files. Each disappearance was treated as isolated, a transient person who had moved on, a troubled individual who had gone off the grid. Nobody cross-referenced them. Nobody mapped the pattern of names that kept appearing in the same geographic cluster, connected to the same address, reported missing within the same social network. Bunting knew this would happen. He had built his operation inside the specific blind spot of Australian law enforcement, the assumption that disappearances of vulnerable transient people were self-explanatory. He had also built a secondary defense system, the voice recordings. Families who might have pushed harder for investigation were neutralized by phone calls from their missing loved ones, voices they recognized, messages that explained everything. In 1997, something extraordinary happened. Australia's Most Wanted, a national television program profiling unsolved crimes, ran a segment on Clinton Trezise, the first victim, still technically an open missing persons case. Bunting watched the episode. He sat on a couch beside teenage James Vlasakis, watched his own victim appear on national television, and said aloud, calmly and proudly, "That's my handiwork." He was not afraid, he was not concerned, he was pleased. The program that should have exposed him had become, in his mind, confirmation that he had succeeded, that no one was coming, that he was untouchable. He was almost right. The thread that finally unraveled everything was Elizabeth Hayden, victim 11. Elizabeth was Mark Hayden's wife, and she knew too much. In November 1998, while her husband and children were out for the evening, Bunting and Wagner arrived at her home. She was dragged to her bathroom and killed. When Mark Hayden was shown her remains, he reportedly laughed. Her disappearance was reported, and this time, something was different. Mark Hayden's behavior was conspicuous. His answers were inconsistent. His account of where his wife had gone kept changing. South Australian police began to look harder, not yet at Bunting, but at Hayden. And as they dug into Hayden's life, they found something that made no sense. In January 1999, Mark Hayden had rented an abandoned state bank building in a small farming town called Snowtown, 140 kilometers north of Adelaide. The question was simple. Why would a suburban Adelaide man need a bank vault in the middle of nowhere? On May 20th, 1999, police executed a search warrant. What they found in the vault rewrote everything they thought they understood about what had been happening in the northern suburbs for the better part of a decade. The 8 bodies in the barrels were not the beginning of the investigation. They were the moment the investigation finally became equal to the crime. Bunting, Wagner, and Hayden were arrested on May 21, 1999. 5 days later, James Vlasakis was taken into custody. He had been living in Bunting's home. He was 19 years old, he was terrified, and he was carrying 7 years of knowledge that was about to bring the entire network down. As we go into the most chilling details of this documentary, take a brief moment to like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already for more in-depth investigations like this. The trial of John Bunting and Robert Wagner begins in 2002. It will last almost 12 months, the longest criminal trial in the history of South Australia. The courtroom fills every single day. Victims' families in the gallery, media in every row, members of the public lining up before dawn for a seat. What they come to hear breaks one of them completely. In October 2002, 4 months into proceedings, a juror withdraws.
The reason given is the graphic nature of the evidence.
After 4 months inside this case, a person selected to deliver justice reaches the limit of what a human being can absorb and walks out. The trial continues without them. James Vlasakis takes the stand behind a screen. His face is not visible. His identity is suppressed. His voice is all the jury gets, and his voice gives them everything. He is 22 years old. He has already pleaded guilty to 4 murders. Now he walks the jury through each one with the precision of someone who has been carrying this knowledge for years and has decided finally to put it down. The lures, the restraints, the recordings, the pliers, the disposal. He describes the night Bunting woke him and told him they were going to kill his half-brother Troy. He describes being handed the handcuffs. He describes what happened in the bathroom while Troy begged. The jury sits in silence. The autopsy reports confirm what Vlasakis describes. The physical evidence confirms it. The recordings, victims' voices captured in their final hours, reciting bank details, saying goodbye to families who would believe those goodbyes for years, are played in open court. The room hears the dead speak, hears what was done to them in the hours before those recordings were made. Bunting and Wagner's defense is as revealing as anything the prosecution presents. They claim they were targeting pedophiles, protecting children, doing what authorities refused to do. They believe this. That is the most disturbing part. Not that they say it as a strategy, but that they mean it. Wagner addresses the court directly from the dock. He says, "Pedophiles were doing terrible things to children. The authorities didn't do anything about it. I decided to take action. I took that action. Thank you." No remorse. No acknowledgement that not one of their 12 victims was ever proven to be a pedophile.
No acknowledgement for the evidence for every accusation amounted to rumor, gossip, and the unilateral judgment of a man who had decided he was God.
In September 2003, the verdicts come down. John Bunting, guilty on 11 counts of murder, sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms, no possibility of parole. He will die in prison. Robert Wagner, guilty on 10 counts, 10 consecutive life terms, no possibility of parole. He will die in prison. Justice Brian Ross Martin is unambiguous in his sentencing remarks. Bunting is the architect, the ideological engine, the absolute center of everything that happened. Every murder leads back to him. Every accomplice was shaped, groomed, and directed by him. Suzanne Allen, victim number 3, buried in 11 plastic bags beneath Bunting's house, her pension collected for months after her death, is the only victim for whom no verdict is returned. The jury deadlocks, charges are dropped. Bunting claims she died of a heart attack. The law, at this specific moment, cannot contradict him. She remains the only one of the 12 without a verdict, officially unresolved. That is where justice drew its line, and it drew it through her. No law was passed, no foundation was established, no public inquiry was commissioned with binding recommendations. The full details of the Snowtown murders were not available to the public for more than a decade after the arrests.
Over 250 suppression orders kept the case sealed. When those orders were finally lifted in 2011, they were not lifted because of victim advocacy or government transparency or a reckoning with what had been allowed to happen. They were lifted because a film production company requested access. A movie needed the information. That is what opened the record. In February 2024, Mark Hayden was released on parole. Prison authorities cited his excellent behavior.
He now lives somewhere in South Australia, under electronic monitoring and strict supervision conditions. The man who stored his wife's dismembered body in a barrel is free. In August 2025, the South Australian Parole Board granted parole to James Vlasakis after he served his 26-year minimum. The board cited genuine remorse and rehabilitation. Victims' families were devastated. The Attorney General requested a review. In December 2025, the parole decision was overturned. The reviewer noted, among other things, that Vlasakis had returned 3 positive drug tests between 2001 and 2025. He remains in prison. He can reapply in August 2026, and if released, he would become the first convicted serial killer granted parole in Australian history. John Bunting and Robert Wagner remain in South Australian prisons. Both have been reviewed by the Parole Board annually, as required by law. Neither has shown any remorse. Not once in more than 25 years. The Bank Vault building in Snowtown was auctioned in February 2012. It failed to reach its reserve price of $200,000. It sold in September 2012 for $185,000. The new owners raised $700 for charity at an open house and installed a plaque commemorating the victims. That plaque, and the $700, is the complete official memorial record for 12 murdered people. The town considered changing its name to Rosetown. It never happened. Snowtown is still Snowtown. 500 people living inside a name that means something they had nothing to do with. And the unanswered question, the one that will never be resolved, the one that Bunting has never addressed and never will, is not about the victims we know. It is about the rock spider wall. That wall had more names than 12. Bunting spent years building it, calling the people on it, threatening them, selecting from it. 12 people died. But the list was longer.
Some names were passed over. Some people were threatened and survived. Some were selected and then, for reasons no one will ever know, removed from consideration before he acted. Some of those people are alive today. They do not know how close they came. They do not know their name was on the wall. They do not know that the man in the house on Waterloo Corner Road had already decided something about them, and then, one day, decided something else. John Bunting has never explained the wall. He has never said who else was on it. He has never explained what saved some people and condemned others. He took that with him. Into a cell he will never leave. Remember their names. Clinton Trezise, 20 years old, the first. Suzanne Allen, 47, still officially unresolved. Ray Davis, 26, intellectually disabled, killed on Christmas Day. Michelle Gardner, 19, she just wanted to live as herself. Vanessa Lane, 42, she told her mother she was moving to Queensland. She wasn't. Thomas Trevelyan, 18, ruled a suicide. Gavin Porter, 29, he fought back. He stabbed Bunting in the hand. It wasn't enough. Troy Yude, 21, killed by people who shared his blood. Frederick Brooks, 18. He had just been accepted into the Air Force Cadets. Gary O'Dwyer, 29. He was invited out for drinks. Elizabeth Hayden, 37. Her husband laughed when he saw her body. David Johnson, 24. He went to Snowtown for a cheap computer. 12 people, none of them what Bunting said they were. All of them human beings who deserved to live. All of them failed. By the people who should have loved them, by the institutions that should have found them, and by a system that sealed their story for a decade and only opened it for a film. They were not bodies in barrels. They were people, and they deserved so much more than what this world gave them. If you enjoyed this content,
join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications.
Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.